A Chocolate Chip Cookie Murder, Chapter 11, Part 2. Hannah managed to keep the polite smile on her face as the guest speaker extolled the virtues of Regency England, where men were gentlemen and ladies were ladies in the true sense of the word. The plump, grey-haired lady in a frilly yellow dress, a retired English teacher from Grey Eagle who had written 3 Regency romances, stated that she was appalled and saddened by the regrettable lapse of moral fibre in the youth of today. She ended her speech by suggesting that parents be guided by the strict rules of polite society that had existed on Albion's shores at the beginning of the 19th century and make an effort to install Regency values in their offsprings. There was a half-hearted smattering of pause when the guest speaker vacated the podium, and then the meeting began. As she readied the refreshment table, Hannah wondered what Lake Eden's teenagers would do if their mothers tried to whisk them back to an era with no cars or video games, not to mention the absence of birth control. Matricide would soar, and Bill would certainly have his hands full. Hannah started the coffee and arranged the platters heaped high with Regency ginger crisps. She'd researched the period, but there were very few published recipes, and none of them had sounded like cookies. She'd even paged through her mother's collection of Regency romances for any mention of desserts, but all she'd found were vague references to duffs, fruit compotes, and seed cakes. Deciding that compromise was in order, Hannah had compiled a list of ingredients that had existed in Regency times, and she discovered that an enterprising person could have baked ginger cookies. Whether they had actually done it was another question, but it would have been possible. It didn't take long for the meeting to conclude, and Hannah was relieved to see that the guest speaker had slipped out the door. That was good. The woman seemed to know a lot about the Regency period, and Hannah hadn't relished being exposed as a fraud. Most of the club members weren't that serious about authenticity. They liked to read Regency romances and talk about them. But club meetings were primarily an excuse to get out of the house and share gossip and refreshments with their friends. The moment the gavel had descended, there was a scrapping back of chairs and a headlong rush toward the refreshment table. Hannah was ready. She had tea and coffee, both leaded and unleaded, and her best silver platters heaped high with cookies. As she poured steaming beverages into bone china cups, blue flowers for decaf and pink flowers for regular, Hannah thought about the phone call she'd received from Bill before she had left the shop. The homeless man, whose name was Blaze, was no longer a suspect. Reverend Warren Sandberg had picked him up just after Claire had seen him and taken him to the Bible Church soup kitchen for breakfast. At the time of Ron's death, Blaze had been scarfing down pancakes with scrambled eggs in front of the Reverend, several church volunteers, and some of his homeless peers. "These are simply marvelous, Hannah." Mrs. Diana Greenson, wife of the local bank president and social climber par excellence, held a cup of the herbal tea in one hand and nibbled on a cookie in the other, her pinky extended. "I'm so glad you like them, Diana." Hannah motioned toward the platter. "Do have another." "Oh, I couldn't. I eat like a bird, you know." The thought of a vulture tearing greedily at a carcass flashed before Hannah's eyes. The last time she'd catered an event that Diana had attended, she'd caught her dropping at least half a dozen date delights in her purse. While Hannah poured and offered coffee or tea to the women in Lake Eden, she kept a sharp eye out for her mother. Before she'd even reached kindergarten age, she'd discovered that Dolores had a barometer face. If her eyes snapped, a storm of criticism was imminent. If her lips turned up, their encounter would be sunny with compliments. If there was a crease between her perfectly plucked eyebrows, a rain of judgmental questions was about to fall. Even a bland expression meant something. It warned of sudden change, and Hannah knew that she had to be prepared to either shiver under her mother's icy censure or bask in the warmth of her approval. Hannah filled a cup with regular coffee for Sally Percy, the wife of Andrea's boss, and glanced at the end of the line again. What she saw made her relax for the first time that day. Her mother was standing in line with Carrie Rhodes, and both women smiled widely when they caught her eye. Hannah knew immediately that Norman had announced their plans to go to the Woodleys' party together. It was the old case of, I know you know and I know you know. As the line snaked slowly past her, and Hannah concentrated on exchanging pleasantries with everyone she served, she noticed that Dolores and Carrie seemed to be having a slight difference of opinion. They weren't arguing. It was much too friendly for that. But Hannah heard faint strains of, "But I'd like to really, this is so good for Norman," from Carrie. And, "No, she'd never accept it from you," from Dolores. Then Carrie's voice wafted down to Hannah. "I'll order corsage. What type of flowers does she like?" And Dolores answered, "She adores sunflowers, but those wouldn't do at all. What about orchids?" By the time Dolores and Carrie had arrived at Hannah's station by the coffee urns, they were both wearing identical cat that got into the cream pot smiles, a very useful phrase that Hannah had picked up while paging through her mother's Regency romances. Carrie took a cup of herbal tea, Dolores selected black coffee, and then Dolores leaned close. "We just came back from Beaumont Fashion, and Claire told us you bought a new dress for the Woodleys' party." "That's right, Mother." Hannah wasn't surprised that her mother knew about her recent purchase. It was almost impossible to keep secrets in a town the size of Lake Eden. "I'd like to buy it for you, dear. Let's call it an early birthday present." Hannah was surprised. Her mother usually wasn't this generous. "That's very nice of you, Mother, but my birthday is in July, and that's over 8 months away." "All right then, Christmas. I'm just so pleased that you bought something in the first stare of fashion, dear. Claire said it looked divine on you, and everyone knows that Claire has exquisite taste. You must let me reimburse you, I insist." Hannah stifled a grin. These club meetings always made her mother spout Regency phrases. Dolores could afford to be generous. Hannah's grandfather had invested heavily in the fledgling Minnesota Mining and Manufacturing Company, and over the years 3M's stock had split more times than Hannah could count. "Did Claire tell you what I paid for the dress?" "I asked, but she said that it was just between the two of you." "How much was it, dear? I'll write you a check." Hannah sighed as she listened to the hoofbeats of the gift horse gallop off into the sunset. She couldn't tell her mother what the dress had cost. She'd promised Claire not to mention the price. "I can't say, Mother. Claire gave it to me at cost, and I promised that I wouldn't tell anyone what I paid." "Not even me?" "Not even you, Mother." Hannah had trouble keeping a straight face. Carrie leaned close to whisper something in Dolores' ear, and her mother began to smile again. "That's a wonderful idea. You'll need a new purse and a pair of shoes, Hannah. Why don't you let me pick up the tab for those? I have a black clutch, Mother. You gave it to me 2 years ago, and my black heels are perfectly—" Hannah stopped and began to frown as she remembered that her only pair of black dress shoes needed to be resoled. "You hit it on the nose, Mother. I could use a new pair of shoes." "Then I'll buy them for you. Choose Italian, dear. They are the only ones that last. And make sure you walk around the store at least twice to make sure they don't pinch. I could go out to the mall with you and help you shop." Hannah winced as she remembered the last shopping trip she'd taken with her mother. Dolores had wanted her to buy a dress coat instead of her all-purpose parka. "That's all right, Mother. I know how busy you are. And that reminds me, how's your tooth?" "My tooth?" Dolores appeared startled and Hannah bit back a grin. Did her mother think that the news on the gossip grapevine travelled in only one direction? It's fine now, dear. Norman's a marvelous dentist. Did I tell you that I saw Ron Lascelles driving away? No, but Norman did. You didn't talk to Ron, did you? He was pulling out when I drove up, and all I saw was the back of his truck. For all I know, it wasn't even Ron. Her mother looked very flustered. Do you think that I should report it to Bill? Definitely. Bill's trying to account for Ron's actions on the morning that he died, and what you saw might help. Carrie shivered slightly. It's frightening to think that someone we all knew could be shot down in broad daylight on our streets. I know, Dolores sighed. As far as I'm concerned, it's Herb Beesman's fault. That boy spends all his time writing tickets, and he's never where he's really needed. If he stuffed that citation book in his pocket where it belongs, he might have been there in time to save Ron's life. Hannah knew she should keep her mouth shut, but she couldn't do it. Herb was hired to enforce Lake Eden's traffic regulations, not to patrol the streets hunting down for would-be killers. She's right, Dolores, Carrie said, and then she turned to Hannah. It must have been terrible for you, dear. Imagine something like that happening right in the back of your shop. Dolores didn't look very sympathetic. Hannah can handle things like that. She's always been strong. She gets it from me. Isn't that right, Hannah? Hannah managed to keep her lips pressed firmly together. This from the woman who'd fainted when she'd found a dead squirrel on her back doorstep. We'd better move along, Dolores. Carrie nudged her. You know how upset these older women get when someone holds up the line. Hannah came very close to losing it. With the exception of Mrs. Priscilla Knudsen, the Lutheran minister's grandmother, Carrie was the oldest lady in the group.